swimming that then they would suck seawater in. It was right on the seawall, and they'd heat it and then pump it in. And anyway, now it had a big superstructure. It's all gone now, but it was kind of. I thought, well, this would be the funnest field work ever, but. Yeah. So wouldn't have to walk as much as you walked. Oh my gosh, that's something.
On one of the properties for the Ashokan Reservoir, there is an Olympic swimming pool in the woods. Trees growing out of it, full Olympic swimming pool. So there you go. You could have had a whole project on swimming features.
That would have been really fun. That must be a pretty fun thing to come across on survey.
Yeah.
Oh, all right. Well, it looks like we're just about at 4 o'clock, and I see we have folks joining us, and will be joining us shortly on Facebook. So we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you, everyone, for joining our Thursday webinar. Before I introduce our speaker today, if you're joining us for the first time, we are Crow Canyon Archaeological Center, nonprofit research and education center here in beautiful Southwest Colorado. This is our campus behind me, and you can check out some of our work and projects and programs and products here online at crowcanyon.org. During our presentation today, if you want to put your questions in the Q&A icon circled here in red, then they won't get lost in the chat, and we'll do our best to get to all of your questions. We are also streaming live on Facebook, and you can come back and watch this and our previous webinars on the YouTube channel. If you have not subscribed yet, please do so. We always like to start with some acknowledgments. We acknowledge the Pueblo, Ute, Paiute, Diné, and Jicarilla Apache people on whose traditional homelands our campus sits. With the work we're doing at Crow Canyon, we seek to bring light into the darkness of memory that these lands, waters, wildlife, and her descendants hold as a result of policies of removal, genocide, and displacement. We seek paths that support and align with Indigenous people and communities. With gratitude, we honor the contributions of present-day Indigenous communities, descendants, the colleagues with whom we partner, and who help guide our work and our mission every day. As always, a gratitude moment, so much to be grateful for. This is an entirely free webinar series, yet so many of you donate often to the series. We are so grateful to you. And as always, we are so grateful to the founder of our series, our dear friend, we miss every day, Taylor Hasbrook, who inspired this program and continues to inspire us as we carry it forward in her memory. We have some great upcoming webinars. Next week, we've got geographical and political implications of Indigenous visualities in national parks. So should be an amazing talk. And the week after that, we have radical comparative politics of ancient Northwest Mexico. So a couple of national and international talks coming up the next couple of weeks. So please join us. Without further ado, I am really excited to introduce my fellow intern buddy at Crow Canyon turned distinguished scholar. Dr. April Beisaw is a full professor of anthropology at Vassar College and a Fulbright scholar at the Natural History Museum Vienna. As an archaeologist, April uses the past to critique the present and help reimagine the future. In 2022, she published Taking Our Water for the City, the Archaeology of New York City's Watershed Communities. This book summarizes a decade of research into the cultural costs of urban water systems. In 2025, this year, the Archaeology of American Protests will be published. This co-authored monograph surveys 400 years of protesting in what is now the United States. Today's struggles for equality, prosperity, and self-determination have deep roots and understanding that long-term cultural continuity can help shape current and future activism. April is an associate editor of the journal Historical Archaeology, a member of the board of the Society for Historical Archaeology, a member of the steering committee for the Contemporary and Historical Archaeology in Theory group, and a past winner of the Gordon Willey Prize awarded by the Archaeology Division of the American Anthropological Association. April, we are so proud to have you with us today. Thank you so much.
I feel exhausted after hearing all the things that I've done. I'm going to go take a nap, and you guys can continue without me.
Well deserved.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. I do want to acknowledge that as a New Yorker and speaking about New York, that it is September 11th and the anniversary of everything that happened there. And many people from this region lost their lives on that day. And we are here where I am on the lands of the Stockbridge Munsee, the Delaware tribe, and the Delaware Nation, who we have worked together, and Vassar College is now returned all Native American ancestors and collections to their descendant communities, and we are fully in compliant with NAGPRA, and that just finished this past July. So I'm proud of the work that we did for that. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, but I do want to say, if you are somebody who wants to introduce yourself in the chat, go ahead and drop in there if you know where your tap water comes from. And if you do, where it is, and if you don't, where you think it might come from. It's a fun project to do with the students, hopefully with some of our homeowners especially. You have a better idea where your water comes from than some of the students who have never had to deal with water coming into houses knows. So this is an image that came from the files of the Olive Free Library that is on the southern shore of the Ashokan Reservoir, and they have been an integral component of my research, and I thank them for allowing me to use these images and for working with me throughout the project. So this project is very different from other books and studies of the New York City water system that tend to take an economic or a political or a historical point of view on what has created this water system for a great city. I am a New Yorker. I am not against New York City. New York City needs water, but I just want us to understand how this water system was created so that climate change is essentially a water crisis. Water is going to flow in different directions and to different people than before. Some people are going to have more, some people are going to have less. So as we are re-engineering for climate change, can we learn from how reservoirs and water systems were created in the past to do better for the future? So this is my summer research team from just before the pandemic, which shut down some of our project and kind of put a cap on what went into the book. And so we're in this landscape, we're wearing waders, we're crossing a stream here, trying to get to what New York City says is public access land for recreation. But it's almost impossible to get to it. So they're being good sports during this project. So this archaeological perspective is a focus on the landscapes instead of lawyers and politicians and names and dates and numbers. There's some of that. Not really any politicians or any lawyers, but people, and there's some numbers and some dates. So the evidence of what has happened to these communities is held in certain places. These are our archaeological sites, and the things that are left behind there, the artifacts. And we use that to assess change over large spans of time. And we focus on groups of people instead of individuals as main actors, which economics, politics, or history tends to do. So it's okay if what I'm going to present to you contradicts with something that you know from one of those other perspectives. So a lot of people have never looked at the New York City water system from above. Archaeologists spend a lot of time with maps and looking from above, whether it's our excavation unit, our entire site, or the region. On the left, the color one is New York City's own map of their water system. All the way down at the bottom in the peach is who uses the water. And then all of that green is who gives the water to the city. There are some lines connecting. Those are aqueducts and tunnels that go under the ground to bring the water there. The system is entirely gravity fed. There's no pumps for this. It just goes downhill from the Catskill Mountains down into the city. The black and white on the right highlights the two towns that my book focused on, the town of Olive, that has half of the Ashokan Reservoir in it, and the town of Kent, which has the entirety of the Boyd's Corner Reservoir and also some of the West Branch Reservoir in it. But for the book, I focused on the Boyd's Corner Reservoir in Kent and the Ashokan Reservoir in Olive as two like analytical units to be able to make comparisons. So I'm going to jump to the end at the beginning so you know where we're going. You get the punchline right away, and then you could see the evidence that builds to that punchline. In both places, the city became the major landowner. This is independent of the size of the reservoir. The Boyd's Corner Reservoir is like 1/10 the size of the Ashokan Reservoir. Independent of the year that it went into service, the Ashokan Reservoir filled with water between 1913 and 1915. The Boyd's Corner Reservoir was fully in service by 1873. There were lots of delays because there was a drought while it was being constructed. And the city became the majority landowner in both towns, independent from the distance to New York City, 40 miles from the Boyd's Corner Reservoir in Kent, 75 miles from the Ashokan Reservoir in Olive. So with the city becoming the major landowner in both towns, the economy of both towns changed. New York City and New York State, after they created these reservoirs, they had to put in rules for protecting the water. I already mentioned there was a drought. The city needs all the water possible to flow into these reservoirs, and they don't want it to flow across driveways with cars and oil. They don't want it to flow over septic systems. They want it to be very clean. So there's been a lot of redirection of water, roads, and railroads to ensure that these water systems stay clean and plentiful, which has changed a lot of the economy and changed the lives of a lot of people who didn't even have their land taken. There were many changes in the land's value and who was the landowners. So now we'll go through with the actual evidence. So this is my GIS, Geographic Information System, digitization of the historic atlas map of the town of Kent, focused in on where the Boyd's Corner Reservoir was going in. So the red is the reservoir that is going in, and the green is the town that pre-existed that reservoir. And then there's little green monopoly houses that have people's names. All you have to see is that it looks like the Boyd's Corner Reservoir in red isn't going to take out a lot of the town. But if you look to the top, if you look north of it, there's an entire community of farmers' mills. That was not taken for the reservoir per se, but the town was completely condemned after the Boyd's Corner Reservoir was created because that white pond that is to the northeast of it is spring-fed water, and New York City wanted all of that to flow down to Boyd's Corner. So you don't just look at where the reservoir was, but all the ripple effects of the city needing to control the community and the landscapes to ensure the water. So Boyd's Corner Reservoir is on the West Branch River, and the spring water of White Pond flows into it. And this was taken by New York City around 1867. And in 1864, just 3 years before, there was a newspaper article that seemed to predict what was about to happen. It said Farmers Mills, this monopoly building cluster to the north of the red, is situated in the lap of several small hills on the northwest portion of the town of Kent and is a village of much notoriety. It has the most beautiful and healthy streams of water running through its center known in the state of New York, capable of driving the machinery of any manufactory for which the water is used. And yet it is strange to say that its location has never been sought and obtained by capitalists of this go-ahead and prosperous county. So right after that, it was sought after and obtained. So the community of Farmers Mills included a whiskey distillery, various mills, a school, a church, some blacksmith shops. That all gets taken away in addition to the 420 acres that were purchased for the actual reservoir itself. Because of this drought that happened right after that, New York City actually got permission to put many ponds in the town of Kent into service. So these were farmers' ponds that they used for their farm, for the animals, for other things in their farm, and now they became part of the New York City water system. So through a series of condemnations, sales, and just absorption, New York City drove away residents and businesses throughout the town of Kent. That all started with this Boyd's Corner Reservoir. So this is zooming out, and these circles with the little dot in the center, the dot in the center is your Monopoly house. And I asked the GIS system to create a circle around every house that is 800 feet in diameter, because in 1893, New York City got permission to abate all nuisances, including the use of water in farmers' mills. So in 1893, the state gave the city permission to go up to the town of Kent, and anything that was happening that would jeopardize the quality of the water, they could stop it, right? The city is 40 miles away, but they could stop what's going on there. But that wasn't enough. So in 1899, the State Board of Health of New York State said there could be no farms within 800 feet of any water that flows into Boyd's Corner Reservoir or any other reservoir. So that's why these circles are showing that pretty much every single building within 800 feet touches water that flows into that red blob. So in the town of Kent, you couldn't be a farmer anymore. And that's what the town of Kent was. So the property values plummeted because you couldn't use it as farms. And the population in the town of Kent was replaced with city workers and the social elite, including Mildred Barely. There's a song playing here, and the lyrics are to the right. So, going back, Mildred released in 1941, when she moved to the town of Kent, this song, It's So Peaceful in the Country. And the lyrics are there about how wonderful it is to live beside a stream and everything. She is part of this wave of people who moves into what used to be farms and makes them into their little estates. She's a Coeur d'Alene Indian in her heritage and became a very popular singer. Every Thanksgiving, I listen to her music. It's very lovely. So Thanksgiving's coming up. I encourage you to listen to it. All right, Margaret, we're moving on. So Boyd's Corner Reservoir, the reservoir itself was just a beginning. Since that 1867 taking and the 1873 put into service, New York City has bought up more and more and more of the town. So this map has some dark green blobs on it. Those dark green blobs are all New York City owned lands. Again, we're 40 miles plus from New York City. New York City has permission to buy lands as part of the Clean Water Acts, the Surface Water Treatment Act, to protect the water that goes into the reservoir because it is unfiltered. So starting in 1867 to today, now New York City owns 15% of the town, and they operate them as these Department of Environmental Protection recreation areas. So this is 10 times the original taking. So this is what the students and I do. We go to these New York City owned properties, some of which are open for recreation that includes hiking. And we hike these properties with handheld GPS units. We take waypoints whenever we find artifacts, and we take geotagged photos. We do not collect any artifacts. We do not excavate at all. And then we tell the stories of what used to happen on these lands that are now forest, that used to be farms. So the arrows are pointing to some of the properties that I will give you some more examples about. So this is the Seven Hills Lake community at the Seven Hills Lake on the right of the white blob. So this is the New York City map. But below this is where Boyd's Corner Reservoir is to the south. So I'm going to go back a little so that you could kind of see where Boyd's Corner Reservoir is. And now we are north, just north of Boyd's Corner Reservoir. So the reservoir is at that southern tip. So this is New York City releases these maps saying, here is where you could go recreate. It says you could hunt and hike. There is not a single parking area identified on the map. The first time I went there with students, this is our GPS track. We parked at the top on Farmers Mills Road to the north. And as soon as we got there, the local Department of Environmental Protection police came and asked us what we were doing. We then hiked around that little topographic peak. It was very difficult hiking. And our point where we were trying to get is right at the southernmost part against Seven Hills Lake here. We're on the New York City map on the right. There's a little square and it says CEM. There's a cemetery in the middle of this hiking and hunting area. So that Seven Hills Lake is new. That was not there in the past. And this cemetery should be accessible by state law. You can't cut off access to a cemetery. So we hiked to go find the cemetery and we found it. And coincidentally, the local community had recently put in a marker for it. But we also found a water pump from the farm. We found bricks. DPBW is Dennings Point Brickwork, so we could date them. And there are all of these farm little houses that are kind of root cellars that the local legend is that they are UFO landing houses. But they're all associated with farm pumps and stone walls. They are farm buildings, not what people want them to be, alien landing areas. In that cemetery, there are many people buried with tombstones that we could read. And in the historic atlas, that property belongs to Mrs. E. Parker. And here is her gravestone in that cemetery, Mrs. Elsa Lee, wife of John Parker. In the upper right, I am standing inside the foundation of her house with one of the directors of the local historical society. And at the bottom is one piece of pottery. There are many pieces of pottery. There's a frying pan, all sorts of artifacts from Mrs. Parker's house. So whereas the city says you could hunt, you could hike on this property, there's really nothing there, maybe a cemetery. There is the remnants of Mrs. Parker's farm there. Jumping to another property, this is the Kent Hills property. Again, the New York City gives you this map that you could go there. They say that you could fish on this property, but none of those little streams actually exist. Everything's completely dry. Remember, water is going to different places. And it is behind the schools and a subdivision. So lots of local people just do whatever they want there. But if you hike there, there are all of these farm features. There's barbed wire. There are these metal springs from these gates. And there are very, very fancy stone walls. This used to be a very wealthy dairy farm. So these two properties are the first one, Elsa Parker's farm, and the second one, David Kent's farm. And in the 1860 census, we could see that they're basically the same age, but Elsa Parker's farm is worth $2,000, and David Kent's farm, the town of Kent, David Kent, his farm is worth $25,000. We could see how many horses and cows and sheep and pigs they all have. David Kent is much wealthier. He was actually in charge of the local bank. So this is to show you that it didn't matter if you were wealthy or not wealthy. Your land wound up, scooped up into this New York City water system and is now owned by New York City. So this is just to the south of Boyd's Corner Reservoir. Again, the New York City map that says you could hike there, but there's no trails, there's no parking areas, nothing. This does show the dashed line of the aqueduct, but that is very, very far underground. You can't actually see it. What used to be there is this mansion. This is the Kittredge Mansion. So as people were leaving, who were farmers who could no longer farm, and people were moving in, I gave you the example of Mildred Bailey, the Kittredge family moved in, and they were winemakers from the Carolinas. And they stayed until Prohibition made it that it didn't make sense to be winemakers. And their house has different bricks that we could date to a different time period. But this set of stairs is part of the Kittredge mansion that's there. And there is a rose garden, a landscaped rose garden that still blooms every year in the middle of the woods, giving us these remnants of the life that was there. So before the Kittredge family moved in 1860, this was another farm with had a 41-year-old farmer who had $5,000 in real estate, so kind of in between the two. And in 1920, it becomes the Carmel Country Club. In 1928, the New York Times is writing articles about how this area is now available for socialites to move in and have a wonderful gentleman kind of farm. And in that 1928 article, they call this farm of William Hopkins virgin forest, carefully and scientifically preserved. Even though it was a farm, it has all of these remnants of a mansion and everything on it. And I'm not sure how a forest could both be virgin and scientifically preserved at the same time. But this is a screenshot of the article, and one of those pictures is the same Kittredge mansion. So Boyd's Corner Reservoir starts in 1867. New York City is only taking 420 acres of land. But in the next 100 plus years, New York City takes more and more and more land. And there has been a total replacement of the original population due to the condemnation of farms and the associated businesses. Pretty much everybody left. So the people who live there now don't have memories of this because they moved in after. This is very different than what happened at the Ashokan Reservoir. So I'm going to pause for a minute here and just give everybody a little chance to catch up with me and a break and see if there's any pressing comments or questions. Liz, Ben, do you have anything that you want me to address before we move on to the Ashokan?
Sorry, unmuting myself there. No, I think we're all wrapped. But thank you for
Okay.
pausing. That's
I don't
great.
want to cause suspense where it's unnecessary. So let's
Oh.
jump into the Ashokan Reservoir. So this is the largest reservoir in the New York City water system, and New York City will say the most important. This is on the west side of the Hudson River, whereas the Boyd's Corner Reservoir is on the east side. It was fully functional in 1915, has 123 billion gallon capacity, and provides 40% of the New York City's water supply. So try to, if you can see it, I know it's a little dark. There's kind of two lobes to this. The town of Olive that I focus on is mostly on the west lobe, and keep track of Boyceville, Shokan, and Olive Bridge. You'll see it on other maps. If you can't see it very clearly here, it's okay. So this is a pre-reservoir map showing the same place. So all of that water was never there before. Totally man-made. I tried to put a little red box around Temple Pond. That is the only body of water that used to be there other than the Esopus River. And that pond is still there a little bit. It's shifted. This red line is a railroad. So that'll be another marker for you to pay attention to. So before the Ashokan came in, there was no large body of water there other than the river that is called the Esopus Creek, but it is a river. It's not really a creek. The railroad was the economic life, and there's many communities along the railroad that are both train stops and post offices. So this is an advertising map for people who are going to summer in the Catskill resorts on the Dayline steamers. So this is from the 1880s, and I put in a yellow box the branch of the railroad that is bringing you into the Catskills that the reservoir is going to go into. So in 1866, there was the Ulster and Delaware Railroad, and the town of Olive was called the gateway to the Catskills because you could see the high mountains, but you didn't go into the high mountains. So it didn't take as long and it was less expensive. By 1882, 70,000 visitors were using this railroad to tour the region. And a round trip ticket from New York City would cost $5, which is about $165 in today's money, not $5 in today's money. So this is a close up of that railroad map. Pretty much all of those red dots are now underwater. So that entire railroad gets shut down just after 1906. So it takes away this tourist economy, even for the other parts that aren't under the water. So before the Ashokan, the main resorts in the region were in Woodstock and Phoenicia. These are pictures of the two main resorts. The Overlook Mountain House at the top could accommodate 200 people, and the Tremper House at the bottom could accommodate 275. These places kept burning down and being rebuilt, so there's various pictures that they look different, the names have changed, but all you need to know, there were some big resorts that had hundreds of accommodations, but all throughout those little red dots along the railroad were people in the town of Olive who would rent out a couple rooms in their house and then built additions to rent out more rooms. That there was this whole boarding house economy that was kind of like farm to table today. You would take the train to one of these houses, you would live with the family, and you would eat the fresh farm products that they could provide. So instead of being a resort community, Olive was about country living. The people who had rooms to let there charged between $5 a week and $4 a day. So that's again $165 a day, right? That's like today's money, right? And one family, like at the bottom is the picture of the Winchell family, would have various houses with various amounts of room. So you're charging for 30 people $165 a week or a day. You're making a lot of money during the tourist season in these rather quaint houses. So the local economy relied on these tourists that needed rooms. So I transcribed the old railroad guides to see how these accommodations changed before and after the reservoir went through. In 1833, Olive had rooms for 1,207 people by itself. So instead of one big resort, there were tons of people living in these small houses. And it was booming that in 1903, one of the local communities, E.P. James, opened this large hotel called Willowbrook. In the postcard at the bottom, there's a tree that's kind of blocking a lot of the building. That one property had room for 150. So this property was built in 1902 and it was taken by the city in 1906. So all of this investment goes pretty much nowhere in the long scheme of things. So what's going on at the Ashokan Reservoir is happening at the same time as the postcard craze in the early 1900s. So I actually have tons of postcards that document what's going on, that have pictures of the places that are being demolished, and even have people communicating to each other about what is happening in their community. So here it says, nowhere else does this peaceful level of wide meadow lands combine so delightfully with the uplifted slopes of high mountains. It is no wonder that hundreds of city folk come here year after year for the season of rest. So that comes from one of these tourist guides that is speaking specifically of Olive. So you're at the entryway to the Catskills. This postcard is from the community of Shokan, which was on the north side of the reservoir. And you can kind of see that there's houses, a lot of red and white. And then there's kind of a flat plateau just above that. So I want you to pay attention to all of those houses and that flat plateau. And then in the next image, I used Google Earth to try to simulate a picture as if I was in the reservoir. So this is the same place now. So that flat plateau is that line there, that is now a highway, Route 28. Most of these buildings were not submerged, but they were demolished because the city learned from Boyd's Corner Reservoir that they need to take more than just what's being submerged. So they took communities that were on the sides, the shores of the reservoir, and demolished those as well. So it seems like there was never anything there, but there was a very large community there at one point. So tabulating the number of accommodations in the town of Olive that has the bigger lines to it, the town of Woodstock, which is to the north, the town of Shandaken, which is to the west, the town of Hurley that is to the east. It was only in Olive, because of this being the gateway to the Catskills and having that railroad, was the boarding economy so huge. Right before, in 1906, right before they take the land, Olive by itself had rooms for 2,366 tourists. So remember, $165 a day for each of those people, or $165 a week for some of them. That is a lot of money. And then the very small brown bar at 1914 on the right, when the evacuation of Olive was complete for the reservoir to go into full service, there is less than 700 rooms. So that entire industry is decimated. And some of those boarding houses are still advertising, even though I know that they were taken. So some of it was still wishful thinking that the city was not going to go through with their plans. So between 1906 and 1914, Olive lost 70% of its tourist boarding house economy. The railroad is gone, the river is gone, and most of their east-west roads are gone. People who used to be neighbors now have to go around this massive construction project to get to each other. So families are on both sides of this thing. So it was very devastating. So on the right, the bigger map is my digitized version of the town of Olive. And then all those little monopoly houses are buildings. The white is roads, and the blue is the Esopus River going through. And then I put a red box on everything that was pretty much destroyed to create the reservoir. On the left, underneath the text there, in the lighter pink is what is underwater, and in the darker pink is what is not underwater, that is on land, that was still taken. So the heart of Olive was ripped out from them, and it created hardships for many people whose land was not taken. A lot of the previous studies of the New York City water system only focus on the people who lost their land, but many people lost much more than just land. So this is a map I created through archival documents that didn't exist before. I went through all the land takings and I plotted everybody's land that was taken. And now it's color coded by last name. So just in the town of Olive, ignoring that there's some in the town of Hurley and some in the town of Marbleton, 479 named individuals and businesses lost their land. It was 8,466 acres that was taken. And the big thing that my research found that nobody knew is that 23% of the land takings in 1906 were women-owned land. Most people think women weren't allowed to own land at that time. This was woman-owned land, and many of them were woman-owned businesses. It is averaged about 15.5 acres for any woman-owned land for about 1,700 acres in total. The male-owned properties averaged 18.7 acres, but totaled a lot more. So there really wasn't a huge difference in the male versus female-owned lands. This is one of the woman-owned properties that was demolished. In a lot of the New York City-centric histories, they say these people were better off having their properties taken away. These are amazing houses. And some of these houses were brand new, like that boarding house that was brand new. So this is Sarah Everett's West Hurley house that is now under the water right by where the spillway is, if you know the Ashokan Reservoir. But women-owned houses lost included, women-owned properties lost included boarding houses that were women-run, like Brookside College, Sylvan Lake, the Cool Breeze House. All of these have postcards that have images of them. The largest women-owned parcel was Mary Cole's 120 acres. I've gone through the records that New York City holds for many of these properties, and women were buying and selling these properties as early as the 1880s for as much as $8,000 in 1880s money. So this isn't just inherited from their father or their husband. They were actively participating in businesses and buying and selling land. So I took that parcel map, this parcel map, and I said, just show me women-owned properties. So all of these orange are women-owned properties with first names, just to re-emphasize where you're getting the sense that they are women-owned. Some of them are big, some of them are small. A lot of them are adjacent to each other. So when these people lost their lands, were they able to find another place to live that was so supportive of women-owned businesses and communities? So everybody always asks me, well, what about the compensation? Eminent domain, you get compensated. This is very early on. The compensation was you got 1/2 of your land's assessed value based on what New York City said your land was valued at, not your own assessment, not an independent person. You got 1/2. That's it. If you wanted more, you had to sue for more. So an example of somebody who sued for more was Tina Krantz Lasher, who was a widow at the time. She had her boarding house as her only income. She is the yellow property here. I left the other women-owned properties highlighted here so you could see. She had a boarding house right next to the railroad that was taken away. She charged $6 per week per person plus meals. She had 10 to 15 boarders, so she was making about $100 a week that she was charging, which is about $2,500 a week in today's money. She was doing pretty good. She told the city that she needed $10,000 for lost income in her time's money. And the New York City deliberated for so long, she died before they gave her family anything. And they gave her family $1,445 for lost income. So compensation was very uneven, but it was never what the people asked for. If you had a business, they generally said you could just redo your business somewhere else. All we care about is the land. There was also cumulative losses. So I looked at family surname to see who lost the most. The Boyce family owned 28 parcels and lost 470 acres. But these families were also all intermarried with each other. So there is this cumulative loss that it's not just you losing. Your parents lost, your grandparents lost, your nieces and nephews lost, your cousins lost. There was nobody to really be okay to care for each other. So just these 5 family surnames, Bishop, Boyce, Davis, Every, and Winchell, they lost 75 parcels for a total of 1,354 acres. So there was this cumulative sense of loss. In addition to private land, farms, businesses, boarding houses, there was a lot of community elements that were lost. So this is showing both past and present where there were schools and churches and cemeteries. And you can see which ones are under all of that hash marking. Those were lost. So about 3,000 people were dug out of graves. Some of them had recently been buried. There were 6 schools that were destroyed and 6 churches that were destroyed. So not only did you potentially lose your business and your property, but your kids didn't have a school to go to, you didn't have a church to go to, and you might be dealing with, my parents, I have to move them to another cemetery. These are 2 of the schools that were demolished, the West Shokan School and the Boyceville School, to show you that these aren't dilapidated buildings. And the Boyceville School, hold on to that. We will get back to that in a minute. As part of this body removal, I've actually been doing a study of the cemeteries because a lot of the community members don't know where their ancestors are because everybody just kind of got reshuffled. So this is an example. This is Abraham Hull. He was a doctor, a farmer, and a postmaster. He died in 1890 before the reservoir went in. He was originally buried in the Shokan Pine Grove Cemetery that was demolished to create the reservoir, and he is now in the Mount Pleasant Cemetery. There's also the creation of the Bushkill Cemetery. So there were still hundreds of people that nobody had claimed, that 2 local guys got together and they did a lot of the work themselves to move these people to the Bushkill Cemetery. So they are in these graves that you might be able to see. These gravestones are really like the size of a shoebox. They're very small, and it just has a 2-letter code and a number code. It doesn't say who is who. And the community wants me to help them figure out who is who. There are 300 of these markers. And I have recently discovered, this is not in the book, that those 2 men, when they buried everybody, they tried to put their tombstones in the grave So theoretically, under all that leaf litter and under some amount of soil, there is a pavement of gravestones that could help us identify who is buried where. So that's a project that we might do in the near future. Otherwise, everybody had to figure out what they were going to do on their own. New York City did not relocate anybody. They did not help with the relocation. You got money, you had to leave. So this map is trying to show part of the problem of doing this history is that communities were recreated in new places. So the arrow is where the community moved themselves to, and they kept the same name. So a lot of the histories are very confusing because it would talk about, say, in the upper left, Boyceville in 1900, and now Boyceville in 2020 is far away from that. But since 2020, New York City has been demolishing Boyceville. So this is, again, an ongoing thing. 100 years later, there are still these demolitions. Before I get to that, just want to key you into the archaeology. We could see these people moving in the surface archaeology. This is a New York City owned recreation property that's just on the north side of the Ashokan Reservoir. This is their map. They say you could hike and fish. There are no hiking trails. There is no parking areas. And again, that little stream is always dry. You cannot actually fish there. But on this property are these ginormous stone walls. So these two young ladies are standing by these stone walls. The woman in green, she just finished her PhD in archaeology at Harvard just this past semester. Here she is as an undergraduate surveying these ginormous stone walls. We have building foundations on this same property, but none of these buildings are on historic maps. So I think what happened is, going back here, these are people who lost property to the reservoir that tried to move up the slope, and this land had never been farmed before, so they had to clear all of this stone to farm it. But it was so unsuccessful that their house never actually wound up on any of the USGS topo maps or any of the atlases, and the local community doesn't remember who lived there. So this is the Boyceville. So in this map, there's a little bit of yellow to the very top of the reservoir. Those are the lands that New York City has recently acquired in Boyceville under a flood buyout program. So it's slightly different from the program that created these other recreation units. So this picture behind a chain link fence is the 1913 Boyceville schoolhouse that was built to replace this Boyceville schoolhouse that was demolished by the city. When the city demolished this Boyceville schoolhouse, almost exactly 100 years later, they told the State Historic Preservation Office they didn't know anything about this building. And I told the State Historic Preservation Office, if you had given me one day, I could have given you the entire history of why this building should be saved. So you might be able to see some yellow signs in the front of the building. It says, this building is now the property of New York City. So the repurposing and the demolition continues. They keep creating these recreation lands. This is one of the new recreation lands that says that you could hike there. It is almost impossible to find the entrance to this property. It is on a highway that you just drive past really quickly. There's a little tiny star where it touches the highway that is pretty much the width of a car. So if you could find that entrance, I tried to hike there. This is my picture. It is dense shrubbery. You cannot get into this 32 acres to hike it. And there's no reason to go to a 32 acres of hiking when you are in the Catskill Park and there are many, many miles of real hiking trails. So I question why the New York City is creating inaccessible public access lands. And my concern is it's because they actually plan to eventually own all of the land around that. So this is just the beginning of their parcels. So to summarize, the Ashokan, in 1906, they took 4,000 acres of land. Between then and 2019, they added an additional 5,500 acres that they opened as recreation land. Many descendants remain instead of in Kent, where they left. But the telling of the history is complicated by a lack of persistent landmarks. So I just include this screenshot of a web article that says 10 drowned towns you can visit, that says one of the places you could visit is the town of Olive. And it says when the water levels are low, the tops of churches, schools, barns, and orchards can be seen. And that is completely not true. New York City took everything away. But they pair it with this European picture of this tower, which makes it seem like there's an Atlantis at the Ashokan Reservoir, which is not true. So my conclusion is that urban water systems come with significant costs to outlying communities, and taking water changes place and its people. And where what happened is not understood, mythology fills in all the gaps to try to make sense of it all. That is my end.
Wow. Thank you so much, April. What an incredible story and picture that you painted of these communities. Well, I'm going to jump into some questions and get the viewers before I satisfy my own curiosity on some things. I did want to point out that, as happens sometimes, there are some people in the audience in this geography. One of our viewers says many houses were moved to higher land. My sister lives in one of these houses. I live a few miles from this map, and part of the railroad is now a rail trail. So is there?
The rail trail is not the original railroad. The rail
Okay.
trail is the 1913 railroad that went in after the reservoir was created. So if you walk on that rail trail, you are at one point walking through the Shokan Pine Grove Cemetery, where that
Oh,
Albert Hull was once buried. So that's just a confusion that some people have. They're like, I'm on the railroad. You're actually
right.
on the north of the reservoir, not at the old community railroads.
Oh, that's good to know. Good clarification. So one of our friends who's watching, who's a Bureau of Reclamation archaeologist, was curious about. Can you tell us a little bit more about the dams? Who built the dams? Was it the Army Corps? Was it New York?
Yeah, it was New York City, and there's a book called The Last of the Handmade Dams. So the Ashokan Reservoir Dam was handmade. They had stone cutters from Italy, right? So
Wow.
there are tons of pictures of the actual like raising the stone. One of the contentious things right now is New York City says they plan to make the dam higher, but they don't plan to make the Ashokan Reservoir larger. To me, this is a
Okay.
geometry problem. You either have to dig
It's
down or it is going to get larger. And then when it gets larger, they're going to need new buffer lands.
wow.
So the buffer land goes right up to the highway on both sides. So I am afraid
Wow.
if there's a new dam construction, there is going to be a new round of takings that is going to destroy the highways and take out my Olive Free Library. That is one of my community partners in this.
Wow. Yeah, that doesn't really pass the straight face test that you would.
They said
It
it
seems.
in front, they said it at an event at the Olive Free Library. And I was
Wow.
like, does it make sense? And they're like, trust us. I'm like,
We're
sure.
here from the
I
government. We're here to help you. Yes, yes.
They didn't give a good answer, but nothing has happened yet. I think the economic downturn and political situations, but it's worth paying attention to.
Certainly. Um, uh, One of our viewers also asks, can you address the for the greater good aspect? Like, was that part the narratives that must have been part of the rationale, if they even felt they had to offer a rationale at that
Yeah.
time?
Even I just gave a talk in the community in the town of Hurley, which is just to the east of Olive, where Kingston is, which is the former capital of New York State. And after I gave my talk, this man came running up to me and says, "You hate the city.
Oh
The
my
city is
gosh.
great. They need water." And I'm like, I don't hate the city. I was born in Brooklyn. My family lives in Staten Island. They drink this. I just want people to understand where their water comes from and that people lose out, right? So yeah, when I teach to my students, I say for the greater good means generally that 49% of the people suffer for
Yeah.
51% of the people to prosper. New York City needed an off-island water system. That is true. But a
Mhm.
lot of the way things happen, some people had only 10 days to get out of their house. Like
Wow.
it didn't have to happen that way. And a lot of the community right now still doesn't understand what's going on because the city makes it seem that it's between them and each individual landowner. And it took
Wow.
making these maps to put it all together. A lot of the people who own the land, when I show them the maps, they can't find their own property because
Hmm.
they don't understand this relationship. Not saying that they're stupid or anything in that. It's just there isn't the education, there isn't the openness. It's we had to do it, it's for the good, shut up and take it kind of thing,
Right.
instead of, okay, is there better ways? Boston made their reservoir system right after New York City did this
Mhm.
reservoir, and they hired a lot of New York City's engineers. And they, for example, the cemeteries that they had to destroy, the city of Boston moved the graves. They kept the stones. The city recreated the cemeteries. It's one big cemetery.
Wow.
And the
Mhm.
entrance gate to that cemetery is made of stones from all the churches that were demolished. And if you are a descendant of somebody who lost their land for the Boston reservoirs, you are allowed to be buried in that cemetery. And the
Wow.
city of Boston maintains that cemetery versus local people created a mass grave that is over an embankment that they're asking an archaeologist who is buried where 110 years later. There are
Wow.
better ways to do things that the better way is for the greater good, right?
Right. Right. Wow. And obviously, at that time, good for Boston. But
Yeah.
I have a much family in that area, so but clearly there was no real explanation of that calculus, right, of the cost. There was no sense of, the kind of environmental justice impacts or social justice impacts or community impacts. They didn't, yeah, even bother, right, to calculate that or really do compensate people or, as you were saying.
It was
I'm
a
I'm
feat of
curious.
engineering, and that was the thing to celebrate.
Right, right. The feet for the sake of the feet at that time. Wow. I just kind of in the weeds a little bit. I was really interested in thinking about the some of the far-reaching economic implications of the boarding house sort of industry lost. I was curious, just and it reminds me a little bit of New England, the recreational piece of people going, from the city into these areas in the summertime, and from the prices that you were talking about, it didn't seem like maybe it was you had to be the uber wealthy, right, at that time to be able to do that. And I was wondering if, in addition to the other economic implications, if it impacted the ability of sort of middle class people to be able to get out in nature for the summer and engage. It's kind of a random thought, but
No, yeah. As I said,
yeah,
there's this postcard craze, and all of the
yeah,
boarding houses created their own postcards. And right after all of this is happening, they start mailing postcards all over the place saying,
hmm,
we're still open. We miss you. Please visit us. So it seems like families, say, like in New Jersey, there were lots of people from New Jersey. You
hmm,
would go to, say, the Cool Breeze House every year, every season. And when they heard that land was being taken and the reservoir was going in, they stopped going. And depending on where in the reservoir area your house was, some people were allowed to stay until the water started coming, and other people had to leave immediately based on the dam was being constructed, kind of thing. So they're like basically begging people to come and
right.
contribute to their, economic needs. So I actually did this postcard survey using eBay. So people
Mm,
buy and sell postcards. I only bought two of them that were really cool. Otherwise, I just look at people take pictures of the front and back, and I just created a database of who was selling them and sending them where. And there was actually one woman who was being courted by a man who was losing his job. There were two people talking about the demolition of their church and whether somebody had asked the priest at the church if he was going to take the Bibles or if somebody else should take the Bibles. So I didn't have to go anywhere. I'm just on eBay and just looking at the you could look at on eBay what was sold in the past. There is such a wealth of the history there. But yeah, a lot of these people are blue collar people from places like New Jersey that couldn't go there anymore or thought they couldn't go or didn't want to go there, even
Right.
before the places were demolished.
Did that boarding house tourist economy ever recreate itself in other places?
No,
Or
because
was it
when
kind
they
of
built the
lost?
new railroad, it was
Yeah.
when the rise of the automobile was
Mm,
happening. So people weren't
interesting.
taking the train the same way that they were. So that railroad wasn't really a success. So it
Right.
stopped being used fairly quickly after that. So, there wasn't a recreation. People tried on the South
Mhm.
Shore of the reservoir. There was a woman who created a bed and breakfast that she advertised that it was a house from the reservoir. New York City paid photographers to take pictures of every single building at the Ashokan Reservoir before it was demolished. I've looked at about half of them, which is 1,000. Um,
Mhm.
there's that house doesn't exist. It doesn't exist on any of the maps. So I think there were lots of people who were like opportunistically trying to build on, come see what was lost and live in the olden days. So it's a very
Right.
complicated tourist economy, but it didn't work. She wound up
Right.
moving to New York City, and when she died, the New York Times, her obituary is that she was the queen of colonial revival, and she used to
Mm.
run this Watson Hollow Inn at the Ashokan Reservoir for like 3 years.
Wow. Wow. Fascinating. Well, maybe just end on one last question. One of our viewers was curious about sort of the deeper history of that area. Did you encounter, were there indigenous communities prior to the settler farmers that were in that area prior? Maybe if you could speak to kind of the deep time there a little bit, if you know.
Yeah, so there is a road that's called Moonha Road, and that in the local history is the name of a chief. And
Hmm.
it is private property. There's a multi-million-dollar house there. But in the past, it was like a hunting lodge for lawyers from Kingston. So it was
Hmm.
like a men's club kind of thing. And according to the history of this men's club, there is a Native American village at the end of Moonhaw Road, which is in this valley. I don't have access to it. I
Yeah.
think a lot of the native sites would be on the Esopus Creek that was dammed. So
Oh,
there
sure.
are some like there's a cave that is listed as being a rock shelter, and a lot of these properties I have not had access to.
Hmm.
So it wasn't that I ignored the indigenous history for this. It's that the story is such that the indigenous history was erased, and
Yeah.
therefore, for me to take the time to try to insert it in would have made the narrative kind of complicated. So
Hmm.
it is horrible that all of this was destroyed, but it's not that I'm ignoring it. It's that I don't have access to it. And as I said, we didn't do any excavation. So we
Yeah.
never found in our surface survey any evidence of native occupation of
Mm.
that landscape. But I have talked to the Stockbridge Munsee about it a little bit, and they haven't really, most of them have their homes in Wisconsin. There's just a satellite community here. It hasn't bubbled to the surface since it's private land. We haven't done
Hmm.
anything there.
Yeah, thank you. Well, to wrap up on your original question to folks, there were a lot of people who know where their water comes from.
All
So
right,
maybe
excellent.
there
This
is
is a highly educated
water.
group.
Definitely. Yeah. Even, and we are coast to coast in terms of our viewership, but obviously a lot of our folks are here in the Southwest where people pay a lot of attention to their water. So there might be some interesting comparisons between the sort of dam building boom in the West and what was happening in the East. So probably lots of material out there for
Yes,
sure.
there is a online website called the Atlas of Drowned Towns
Wow.
that has a lot of the west of the Mississippi towns that were demolished to create dams. So if somebody's more interested in that region, it's run by Bob Reinhardt, who's an environmental historian.
Oh, fantastic. And it looks like we've got somebody in the chat. We'll make sure Ben sends you the email from a SUNY Binghamton student who is looks like is connecting with your work too. So we'll make
All
sure we
right,
get you that information.
cool.
But oh, April, so wonderful to meet you. Please
Yeah,
come back to Crow Canyon.
I'll
The
be
site
there in 7 hours. How's that?
Perfect.
You'll be
Perfect.
asleep.
And visit us sometime. What amazing work. I'm really can't wait for your new book to come out. We will be reading it here and hopefully connect with you again soon.
Okay, thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks so much, April. Have a great night.